Friday, the final day of the week. These are the voyages of the program Unsportsmanlike Conduct. Its ongoing mission: to explore strange new movies, to seek out new bits and new edifications, to boldly go where no radio program has gone before. Oh, Kent's Movie Club. It's El Kent's Movie Club. El Kent's Movie Club. It's El Kent's Movie Club. And we welcome in, as we do every Friday, Kent Wogamon of the Lincoln Journal-Star. It's game day, Kent.
Yes, it is. I've been downtown once today. It's definitely not a normal Friday.
No, it is not.
It's not. Do you know how many games of the sellout streak approximately you've attended?
Well, number 100 was Penn State in 79.
Yep.
I'm 100% sure that I've been to 95% of the ones since then. And I was at game in 74, 75, actually in the 60s. So probably, I don't know, 330 maybe.
What was the first game you ever attended here?
Wow.
1966. I was a newspaper carrier, and there were subscription. If you got enough news subscriptions, you could get a free trip to the game. And so, and I believe it was I'm pretty sure it was Colorado. This was in the, they were playing in like October or whatever. And I do remember I was sitting in the north end zone.
Yeah, because that's when they had started to enclose the stadium.
Yep.
At that point. Interesting.
Ken, what is the most memorable game? What is the game when you just sit and think about going to Memorial Stadium that you're like, yep, that's the one that sits with me more than any others?
Well, there are many. There are a couple that I don't think a lot of people always name.
Yeah.
And the year escapes me, but it was scoring explosion time. 83. 82, 83, somewhere in there. And they were playing Colorado. And Colorado was ahead.
83.
7-0 at halftime, or 14-7.
It was 14-12. Nebraska was up by 2 at halftime. I was there. I remember.
And then they hung 49 on them in the third quarter. 48. They missed an extra point. They did. 48 points on Colorado in one quarter.
And the floodgates were opened when Bill McCartney decided to fake a punt at his own 25-yard line.
Oh boy.
It blew up in his face, and then
wow, the Wikipedia says Nebraska put up 3 touchdowns in the first 2:24 of the second half. My God.
Wow. Yeah. It was pretty crazy. That's
awesome.
I
nice
was
pick,
here for
Ken.
that one. That was a good one.
That's a fun one.
All right. Well, this week's movie is Platoon.
Oh, what a vibe change going from talking about this to Platoon.
Yeah, so this came up, I don't remember. John made a reference to it last week or 2 weeks ago, and I filed it away. I went and searched on
it was the line from the movie. I got a bad feeling about this.
Yeah, and so found it was on Amazon, so decided to go with this. I mean, it's a Vietnam War movie. I really don't feel like it needs more setup than that.
Kind of a bummer.
Let me ask you this, Kent, to start, because as I'm watching this movie earlier this week for the first time, I was thinking about Vietnam War movies now, because I've seen, 3 or 4 of them, and we've done 3 of them, right? We did
Apocalypse.
We did Apocalypse Now. We did Platoon,
and Full Metal Jacket.
Yeah, okay. And so I don't think we have done a World War II movie in the movie club, but we have done multiple World War I movies.
We have.
The one we did a couple weeks ago was World War II era. But not an actual war movie.
But here's my thought, Kent, to kind of kick off the conversation. I think that the Vietnam War and doing doing fiction on it or whatever you want to describe this as. I feel like this is such a weird thing to say, but it's the best war to do movies about because it is so much more complicated. World War II movies, it's easy, right? Good guys versus bad guys. I have found myself now in the last 5 years, really since that we started this, I loved Apocalypse Now. I found this movie, and the more that it sits with me over the last few days, enjoying it more and more. Would you agree with that theory that doing movies, television shows, books, or whatever about Vietnam, because of the complications, makes it more interesting than other wars?
Well, it certainly allows a different kind of movie, a movie with a little moral ambiguity in it, I guess would be one way to say it. And it also, I think, is important to note that the filmmakers who are making these movies are of the generation of Vietnam. Okay.
Yeah.
And that, that includes Coppola, of course, who made Apocalypse Now. Stanley Kubrick wasn't going to go to Vietnam, but he saw Vietnam, right? And then Oliver Stone, who made this one, actually based this movie in part on his experiences as a soldier in Vietnam. So, yes, I would agree with that. And I think if you look, the famous World War II movies are all pretty much flag wavers, right?
Yes.
There's not any, even Saving Private Ryan, which is probably the most notable recent World War II movie, there's still a little of that in there, but it's more complex because it's more contemporary film. But these Vietnam movies, with one exception that I can think of, which is a 60s movie, actually, The Green Beret.
Yes.
More World War II, like flag waving, look at these American hero fighting the war in Vietnam, So I think that's part of it. And I also think that Vietnam became filmable when the nature of film had changed, right? A little bit. You're going to have a more of a, as you're saying, multi-viewpoint, multifaceted thing, where the earlier movies are very narrative. This is about this battle or whatever.
Yeah.
The way it went about, and of course, honestly, the conflict, yes, it's, there's obviously conflict with the Viet Cong, but the real conflict of the movie is the conflict within the platoon.
Oh yeah.
With William Dafoe's character and Tom Berenger's character, and how it has split the platoon into different factions, and that's really the story
and what it leads to
that carries it through the entire way. Which interesting that was the choice to go about it, but I guess it's probably it was kind of a micro way to look at the macro issue of just the overall conflict, because we don't really argue the conflict of should we be here or not in this film.
No.
But through this conflict within the platoon, it kind of addresses that, right?
Oh, I'd agree with that. And I would also say that that's based in very much reality that happened in Vietnam. My uncle Mike was I believe he was a captain at that point. And he was in Vietnam, but he was a quartermaster, right? So he wasn't on the front line. He was a supply guy. But he's told me stories of there's fragging in the film. That was real. That happened. One of his colleagues, I guess, got blown up by his own troops.
Wow.
Threw a grenade in his tent. Stuff like that. That kind of inner military conflict took place regularly in Vietnam. And so that I think you're right on it, showing the division, but it's also reflecting this horrible reality, because this was not a conventional war. You're in this guerrilla warfare or whatever you want to call it, and so you don't have all the conventional battle lines and anything else, and there are echoes, like in that scene where young Bacon, I can't remember his first name, shoots the Vietnamese guy in the hut after that's allusion to like My Lai, right? Where they just killed these civilians for no reason, so it's really brings that out as well.
Going back to the time period when this movie comes out in 1986. The actors in this, I mean, watching it today, I'm blown away by all these people that I recognize. Tell it, like, because I didn't do any research on the timeline of these actors before this. How well known were these people? And okay, so that's what I was wondering, if this was going to be the movie that kind of blew a lot of these people. Shouldn't maybe use that term in this movie, but that allowed their careers to get bigger and better.
Blossom.
Thank you, John. Good Lord.
The answer to that question is virtually none. I mean, they were, some of them were seen as, on their way up, but like Charlie Sheen was like probably the fifth or sixth choice to be cast in this
He's
role.
Amazing in this.
And Berenger and Willem Dafoe were just getting started. And I think this might be Johnny Depp's first movie. Did you notice him in there?
Yes.
I literally did not until I was just looking through the Wikipedia page.
Now, if you watch the closing credits, it credits him and shows him basically the only scene. I don't think he has a speaking part, but there's a scene where he's seen carrying an infant or a child out of there.
He spoke a few times. Wasn't he the translator?
Oh, that's right. He was the translator.
Yeah,
he was the translator.
I realized it was Johnny Depp because I paused it once, and then the X-ray showed up, and I'm like,
okay.
What the hell?
Yeah.
Okay, now I do have sort of a very interesting story about this whole production, because there's a Lincoln actor, and I believe he still lives here. His name's Corky Ford, and he played Manny. And Manny ended up with no lines because he got left on the cutting room floor. But he is a pivotal character in the movie, even though you don't think about it. He's the guy that was tied to the tree with his neck split.
Okay. And that, of course, led them to go off and basically take out the village.
Wow.
And that sets up the main conflict. So that was Corky. And Corky got cast in this movie. It was shot in the Philippines. And he got off the airplane in the Philippines, and Stone was basically putting these guys through jungle warfare training. And when he got off the plane, he told me that he didn't even recognize Forrest Whitaker because he'd been bug bit and stuff so bad. His face was all swelled up. The first thing he had to do was dig his foxhole. And Stone did all that deliberately to get these guys completely burned out and kind of at each other.
Yeah.
From that.
Interesting.
Because even the soldiers that were friendly with each other were kind of at each other, even in the different factions. So that was that when I that was the first time I had heard that, when I read about that, what Kent just said about putting them through that kind of training.
Yeah, no, building off of that, and I wish I didn't. I watched this movie last night, and I watched it late, and then right after the movie, Amazon started the documentary, hour-and-a-half documentary about the filming of this movie, how there was a war in the Philippines, like Willem Dafoe got off the plane, and then immediately all the flights into the Philippines and out were canceled because of this big coup happening.
Yeah.
And then they had an actual Marine in to train all of these guys. He made a 2-week program, basically putting them through a crash course of military training, living in the jungle, having to actually backpack with real equipment, not props.
And
Is that the guy who does like all the war movies?
Well, I think it was the guy who played Captain Harris.
Correct.
That guy does. That was Private Ryan.
That was him. Yeah, so he actually played Captain Harris in the movie, but he was also the behind the scenes trainer.
He put them through, like what Kent was saying, the Oliver Stone thing. It was him and Oliver Stone worked together to really do that because they wanted them to feel like they were there. And even on set, they would go by their on-screen names, not the real
Right.
names.
And the kicker to the story that I didn't add was for that scene where he's got his throat slit. He had Corky said that Stone, they had him made up, but he didn't tell anybody. Nobody knew, and they literally took him out and tied him to the tree.
Oh my God!
Oh, so they didn't know this was in the script.
Correct, and then sent the actors out in character to find him. And Keith David, who's I can't remember his character, but he's kind of
King.
There you go. Was actually the first person that found him, and he puked.
Oh my gosh!
Holy
That's going to get you in character.
Yeah.
I did not know that. That is wow.
I wonder, because I got about half an hour in the documentary, and then I fell asleep watching it.
Yeah.
I wonder if they covered that in that documentary. Charlie Sheen narrates it.
Yeah.
It's a very good documentary because he also talks about how, because they also filmed Apocalypse Now in the Philippines.
Mm-hmm.
And he was talking about how it was weird how 10 years ago he was there hanging out with his dad in Apocalypse Now.
Yeah,
10 years later,
in it.
he's also narrating a movie about Vietnam in the Philippines.
Fascinating. Yeah.
Yeah, there's no question that Sheen does a tremendous job. I mean, everybody in this film is really good. For Tom Berenger, who plays just this character that you cannot like.
Yeah,
I mean, it's just,
from minute one, too.
He's just terrible.
Horrible person.
And then, within a year or two, he's playing, the catcher in Major League, which is one of the most
likable characters,
characters. But I thought Berenger did an excellent job in this, and it almost, it was just, I remember seeing this for the first time. And, I grew up, my father fought in Vietnam. We did not talk about Vietnam. He didn't like to talk about it. And so to me, this was kind of my education. This is the first of what I would say the gritty Vietnam films that I saw. I saw this before Apocalypse. I saw this before Full Metal Jacket. So this was kind of my entry or indoctrination into, the Vietnam War. Because interesting, in high school, we didn't really study the Vietnam War.
Interesting.
Yeah, we never really got to it either.
Which I always thought was interesting that we never did. So, in a weird way, this movie educated me on Vietnam.
I should ask. So my mom has an uncle, so my great uncle, and he's still with us. He lives in Pennsylvania. He also fought in Vietnam, but same like your dad. Never really talked about it. So I've never heard him talk about it. And I wonder if for my mom and for other people in the orbit of my uncle, if it was same for them, where it's like they learned about it through a movie like this or Apocalypse Now or something.
This is going to be very Gen Z. I learned about it through Call of Duty Black Ops.
Sounds about right.
Because that game takes place during the Cold War, and there's a whole section of levels where you're in Vietnam doing all of that. That's where I first learned more about Vietnam, and then I tried to dig more into it with Full Metal Jacket and all of that. I still haven't seen Apocalypse.
Oh, man. That was one of the earliest movie club movies. I was blown away by it. I could not believe how great that movie was.
I enjoyed of the
You
three,
like this one more,
I like
right?
this one the most.
Yeah.
I think this one, it's got a great story. It moves really well, and it's just so intense. I mean, the scene in the village when they basically pillage the village, pardon the rhyme, is so powerful and so disturbing. And if you weren't already like sunk into the gravity of the situation, that scene forward, everything changes.
That village scene, it was interesting to me because I remember watching it and I put myself in the shoes of one of the villagers. Like, you see these people here, you don't understand what they're saying. You see them murder your friends and family and be mean, and then you see them turn on each other. That has to just be barbaric.
Yeah, you're like, what in the world is happening?
It just has to look like barbarian.
Yeah, and it feels like pointless. Ken, how would you, of the three that we've mentioned now, how would you rank those three? And we've, like we said, we've watched all three of them in the movie club over the years.
Let me go two ways with this.
All right.
Platoon won the Best Picture. Academy Award for Best Picture. Okay. On that kind of that level, it's probably the best of the three, right? I think Apocalypse Now is the more interesting of the films because it's not it's more than just a Vietnam movie, right? It's essentially an adaptation of Joseph Conrad, Heart of Darkness, right? So you're taking this literary basis and setting it in Vietnam, which gives it it takes it a different way. So I don't see it as much as just pure Vietnam. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I put Full Metal Jacket the third, but they're all really, really good. And you mentioned Berenger and Willem Dafoe. They each got nominated for Best Supporting Actor, and the sense is they canceled each other out.
They split the votes.
Who won that year? Do you remember?
I don't.
Ken, I have. Sorry.
Go ahead.
Josh, Go ahead. Go ahead, Joe.
In that documentary I watched, they had mentioned the casting process and how originally I think Emilio Estevez was in the movie, and then they had mentioned that there were different reshoots. Is there a version of this movie somewhere, or bits of this movie somewhere, where it's the original first few shooting sessions?
The answer to that is not the original, because that thing was almost 4 hours long.
Oh wow!
Woo!
And that's why Corky doesn't have any lines in the movie. Why Manny doesn't have any lines.
Okay.
That makes sense.
He got cut completely out, and Stone basically apologized to Corky for cutting him out and then cast him in Born in the 4th of July, which is another Vietnam type film. And Corky does have some lines in Born on the 4th of July.
By the way, Michael Caine won for Hannah and Her Sisters
Okay.
in the Academy Awards.
A fine Woody Allen film.
Oh, okay.
Seeing John C. McGinley in this movie, I love him as an actor, but I love Scrubs, and I know him mostly from Scrubs. So whenever I would see him and hear him talk, even the parts where he was being genuine, it just sounded like when he was being sarcastic as Dr. Cox. So it was really hard for me to, especially the end when he was starting to freak out. It was just hard to break. And
Such a damn weasel.
He had so much Dr. Cox mannerisms, too. It looked like it was just Dr. Cox in Vietnam.
Well, that's Platoon. It is currently streaming on Amazon Prime.
That documentary is, too. I do recommend watching that. It's an hour and a half. It's really good and fascinating.
Yeah,
Awesome.
I will definitely catch that.